Okay, in this video, I'm going to focus on, say, exploratory plotting. So I'm going to talk about plotting one variable. So when we're plotting one variable, it's typically not something that we intend to show to an audience. Typically, we just want to simply plot a distribution. So it's something that we do to get a better idea of what our data really looks like, some characteristics of our data. So this will typically just be a first step in a longer analysis. But that's what we're going to talk about now. Okay, so in the previous video, you saw how you can change all kinds of small details in a plot with Matplotlib, and you can make some very nice plots with Matplotlib with lots of code where you're changing lots of specifications. We can also do some very quick and actually quite nice plots with Seaborn, as you will see here. So what I'm doing here is that I simply just write one line of code. So I'm making what's called a distribution plot. So to create this plot, I'm writing SNS and then to access Seaborn and .displot, and then I'm specifying the variable that I want to plot, and then I'm specifying that I also want to create a histogram. And this is basically what I get out. So first you should notice that the default configurations that I specified in the previous video, they are still here, right? So they're basically in all our plots until we change this at least. And then we in addition to that, we simply just have already a quite nice plot with just this one line of code. So we have X labels here, even though it's not a perfect X label, we know what's on our X-axis. We also have a Y label, so that's a density. And then we have a nice illustration of the distribution of our data. So we can see that we have histograms underneath this line here. So that's what we got from writing hist equals true. But then we've also got this estimate of the distribution of our data. And this estimate has been smoothed with a kernel. So we get this nice illustration or estimate of the density of the total bill variable, but in a smoothed and very easily digestible way. So that's quite useful. So it's not perfect, this plot, right? So we may, if we have time and if we do intend to show this to some audience, we may want to change certain things about it. We can easily still do that. So it's not like when we work with Seaborn, we can't change any details of the plot anymore. So we simply just use this X object now and set equal to this plot, and then we specify that we want to change the X label to something that's a bit nicer. So before we just had this raw total bill thing going on down here. Now we can write it in a nice way. Okay. Another thing that I'm doing here to make the plot look nicer is that I use this dspine function in Seaborn. So what this does is that it removes this line here. So there is a more general discussion of whether or not you should use as little ink as possible in a plot. I'm not sure that I believe that you should remove all ink in plots, but I think sometimes you should really think about what lines and what parts of the plot that you can live without. Sometimes you may want grid lines, but sometimes they can just be disturbing. So therefore you want to remove the grid lines. So we don't have any grid lines here. But in addition, I just thought this thing here, that's also not very informative. It just makes our plot a little more clumsy to look at. So therefore we despine the plot. So you can compare that to this one we have here. So here we're removing some, say, ink. Okay, we can also use a very similar approach for plotting a cumulative distribution with this plot approach. So again, we are creating this object X from the displot function. I'm specifying that we want to plot the total bill variable. But now, in order to create to plot a cumulative distribution, I'm specifying that this cumulative keyword should be true. And then I'm also specifying that the estimate of the density of the total bill variable should also reflect the cumulative distribution instead. And then in addition, I'm changing certain things about our plot. So I'm still again specifying that I want total bill to be our X label, and I want cumulative density now to be our Y label, and then I despline the plot, and then I get the following here. So you can do a range of things with, for instance, this plot plot in Seaborn. Okay, so there's still other things that we could do about this plot, right? So we could, for instance, change the color of our histogram in, say, the cumulative density plot, so that we have two different colors in these two plots. We could also use different bins to show to display our raw data in these histograms, or we could create plots in based on subgroups in our data. So we could maybe, for instance, create a plot for both males and females in our data, or something else. So I suggest that you try and play around with these things when you have time. So you will have time for this, and you will also play around with it in the exercises. But I think this is something that's actually quite fun to do.